Great evening. My name is Tabitha Christopher, tabithachristopher.com. I had to think for a moment what day it is because I typically don't come on live on the weekend. However, this is a topic that I started in my Instagram and Facebook stories on the topic of freedom, and it's going to be a pretty cool conversation. I guarantee you that. My company founded the Mind Style Makeover Bootcamp, which is a character and resilience building training program for students in college and high school, providing them with a roadmap to succeed academically, athletically, socially, and emotionally. The question that I posed in my Instagram stories and Facebook stories yesterday was, what does freedom mean to you? And I was starting to share about a conversation that I've been having for the last several weeks with select individuals on this very topic of freedom and what it is versus what it's not. And I've got to be completely transparent with you. Coming to understand what freedom actually is was startling for me, because what I thought freedom was before the age of 10 years old, I thought what was shared in my story, like I gave a selection of choices to choose from, asking my friends on social media, like, what do you think freedom is? And the first option was, freedom is being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want to do it. The second option of what freedom is, well, freedom is I can do whatever I want to do until it affects someone else's freedom. The third option is that freedom is, I'll see if I can remember it. Freedom, the third one, I might misquote it here. Let me see if I can pull it up. No, I can't pull it up. But the third one, just to like paraphrase, I think I was speaking, I think the option was, freedom is um, being aware of boundaries and operating within those boundaries. And then the fourth option was, freedom is like responsibility, something to that effect. It was around that, just to paraphrase. So what got selected was, was what I thought freedom was many, many, many years ago. The first thing that I thought freedom was being able to do whatever I wanted to do, whenever I wanted to do, and with whomever I wanted to hang out with. I could just be free from all of my parents' rules. I could be free from all of the constraints of the rules and regulations at school. I am free to do whatever I want. I thought that's what freedom was. And then the second, as I matured a bit, still really young, I thought, okay, well, my freedom stops when someone else's freedom begins. And then I got to meet the great Dr. Myles Munroe when he came to speak at the church that my family and I were attending back in St. Thomas, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And he was talking about freedom. And in his book, The Burden of Freedom, and I will say this is not a sponsored live or anything like that. I've just always loved his teachings. I loved how straightforward he is, and that he never beat around the bush, and he gave it to you straight. He cut out all the fat and just went straight for the main meat. He gave you the really, really good parts. So in this book, The Burden of Freedom, he recounts this incredible historical time when the children of Israel were freed from their slave master, Pharaoh. They were in bondage for over 4 centuries. Yeah, you heard that right. For those of you that don't know the story, for those of you that do, you know they were in bondage for about 420 years. 420 years. Incredible. They get freed. And in less than a week, they were begging to go back to slavery. He gives an incredible recounting of that. And so then you would think all of these years that they were in bondage, and then, then groups of Israelites died off, and then their children were in bondage, and then their children's children were in bondage, and everyone's complaining about being in bondage and wanting to be free. When is God going to hear the cries of his people and free his people? All of this, right? Their cries are going up to heaven and going up to heaven for over 400 years, and then finally they get freed. And within less than a week, they are complaining and begging to go back to the very thing that they said they wanted no more. Less than a week of experiencing freedom, they wanted slavery yet again. Why? Why? Why do you think that happened? And they made a big deal about it too. Like they were ready to kill Moses, Moses and his brother who came to free them. They were ready to get rid of them. And then once they got rid of them, they were going to go back to Pharaoh to say, hey, take us back, we'll be your slaves. What happened? What was it that they encountered in freedom that made them want to go back to being slaves? You see, what the children of Israel got to experience and came to understand very quickly was that freedom did not mean free of responsibility. Freedom actually equated to greater responsibility. I'm going to say that again. Freedom doesn't negate or diminish one's responsibilities. It only increases and intensifies the burden of responsibilities. You see, now that the children of Israel were free, they now had to do time management. You see, before, when they were in slavery, someone else told them when they were to go to bed, when they were to get up, when they were to eat, what they were to eat, what they were to wear, what they were to do, where they were to live. Everything was told to them. And whatever it was that their masters, their slave master, wanted to provide to them, it was provided to them. So they didn't have to think for themselves. In fact, they actually weren't allowed to think for themselves, because that's what free people do. They think they are able to they're able to think creatively to find solutions to problems and create opportunities. It's a whole different ballgame. These individuals weren't even allowed to really think for themselves. Everything was done for them. It was hard work, hard labor, and many of them died under the torture of punishments enacted on them in that environment. But they become so conditioned to not having to think for themselves, to not having any responsibility to care for, think for themselves in any way. Their minds became dependent and in a lot of ways, lazy. You're like, no, they weren't lazy. They were hard workers. Yeah, they were hard workers that were enslaved and in bondage. Their minds were weakened to believe that they couldn't do anything more than what they were, which were slaves to Pharaoh, to fulfill the will of Pharaoh. So now, less than a week of getting free from all of that, they're met with what they had not ever experienced in over 400 years: freedom. Now they had to make all these different decisions for themselves and their family that they didn't have to before. They had to figure things out that they didn't have to figure out before. They had to learn to trust God, their Savior, in a way that they didn't have to before, because Pharaoh was their Savior in a weird way. Not much of a savior. He was killing them off, and using them for the building of his temple, of his shrines. Right. So what happened was, the children of Israel, as it says here in Dr. Myles Munroe's book, nothing changes until the soul changes, until your mind changes. So the environment that they were in bondage, changed. They went from being in the environment of slavery in Egypt to being called out of it to freedom, to go to Goshen. So physically, their environments changed, but mentally, they remained the same. The enslaved mind of who they were in Egypt was the same when they left from Egypt. So that slave mentality was still very much present. So it didn't matter that their environment was different, their mentality remained the same. And the mentality of a slave that's dependent upon the master to do for them everything is not able to handle the burden of responsibility that is married to freedom. So when they were met with the burden of responsibility that is freedom, they were overwhelmed and was like, take us back. We told you to leave us in Egypt. No, they didn't. But the mindset was still that of a slave. And they craved what they were familiar to and who they had conditioned their minds to become over the centuries of bondage. So I want to read this excerpt from Dr. Myles Munroe's book that may very well, as he states right here, may step on some toes. There is no freedom without law. There is no freedom without law. And he goes on to talk about, he gives an example of when he started, when he came out of leasing a building for his old church. And then, they were able to build up the resources and the funds to build their own church and own their own land and own that building and so forth. And they moved from out of that lease agreement into where they are now the landlord. They are now the owner of that land and the building. When trouble came, they couldn't call a landlord. They couldn't call and put the trouble on someone else's plate to resolve for them. They were now responsible to take care of those problems and those issues, right? They were free from the lease. They were free from all of the different parameters and that were put in place by the contract under their last landlord, under the master that they were under with that lease. And now they were free from that and had their own. Now they were the master of their own building, of their land, and so forth. So all of the responsibilities that comes with ownership was now on their shoulders. And they said, he said in the book, he said here, their first night in their new building, the toilets got clogged up because their children, meaning his children and the other members of the congregation children decided it would be a good idea to clog up the toilets with rolls of toilet paper. And so they did it to one toilet and it ended up clogging up many other toilets in the building. And he remembered, like he remembered his automatic response was to pick up the phone and call the landlord, because that's what they did in the under the contract they were under before. It was someone else's responsibility to take care of those problems. And when he went for the phone, he was like, wait a minute, who am I gonna call? It's on me. I'm the one that has to take care of all of these issues now. And so there's a shifting of the mind when it comes into being able to truly fully experience what freedom is. I know for students that are watching this that's under your parent rule, under your parent house, you're like, man, I can't wait till I get out so I can be free from all of these restrictions. I can be free from all of these laws that they have up in place, all these regulations. When I get out of school, I can't wait to get out of school so I can get away from all of these restrictions. And I want to encourage you to know this, that freedom happens within the parameters and safety of laws and regulation. Without the laws, without the regulation, it's complete chaos. Every man and woman for themselves. And we will have a society that is destructive. If everyone can do whatever they want without any restraints, it will not be a very pretty place to live. In fact, many of you may have experienced in your past or even now, when crime happens, when people break the law and do whatever they want, it leads to destruction. And unfortunately, many times it leads to the permanent destruction of someone's life. So within the safety of laws and regulation is freedom, when we choose to want to abide within them. True freedom is permission to work and fulfill your potential. Oftentimes, when we hear the word freedom, we may not think that it is synonymous with work. We may think, no, I can't wait to make a whole lot of money so that I can just relax all day, play golf, travel the world, and just do much of nothing. When the truth of the matter is, those that we may look up to, that are millionaires and billionaires, and they have all of this wealth and money, those individuals had to wheel and deal, and many of them are constantly working, even still till now with all of their money and wealth. They're still working to sustain that wealth for generations to come. And then those that it gets passed on to, if they want that wealth to remain within their family, they too have to learn the disciplines of wealth building and wealth retainment for it to be sustained through generations. So, as he says here in page 206, true freedom is permission to work and fulfill your potential. Your destiny is responsibility. Your future is freedom to work, to dominate, and to rule. So all of these, I don't know what to call them, pillars in regards to freedom. As I said earlier, when I first learned of this, I was 10 years old when I heard Dr. Myles Munroe talking about this. And I was shocked, but I was also grateful at the same time, because it helped to give me a clearer understanding of and help to create an attitude of gratitude within my heart towards my parents and the rules, the guidelines, and the laws that they set up within for our family for the sake of protection, to help us to be able to prosper within that environment, and to provide us a clear path to work hard so that we could work towards fulfilling our greatest potential. And that wouldn't have happened if there weren't those parameters set up for us to know how we are to operate. I say we, meaning my siblings and I. And when any one of us went outside of those parameters and we rebelled against that, it created chaos. It made things very hard for the entire family. It made things really bad. It affected more than just that person that was rebelling against those rules. So it's like when we think about freedom, and we hear over and over again, or it's sold to us that freedom is lack of responsibility, or being able to do whatever I want, whenever I want, with whomever I want. That's a wide path to a destructive, chaotic life. Freedom actually is found within great responsibility, knowing what those boundaries are that are set, that those life principles, those boundaries that are put in place to provide us with protection so that we can be able to experience the promise that is gifted to each of us to fulfill our great potential, that is only able to be fulfilled within those parameters of principles that set up boundaries for us to excel in. Without the boundaries, with a boundary-less society, I don't know if I have to expound further on that. I could just say, turn on the news and see what happens every time someone decides to go outside of those boundaries of the law and do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, and to whomever they want to do it to. It ends up in destruction. And it affects more than just that person and the other person that they were attacking. It affects the whole community. So I hope that helps to bring some clarity to the topic of freedom and what it is. And I want to encourage each of you that's watching this live or catching this on the replay. Um, if you think that operating within the parameters of regulations or laws that your parents have set, that's set within the schools, that's set within on your job, etc., I want to encourage you to know that that's where freedom is. That's where freedom is. Anything outside of that, I mean, some can say, you know what, why don't you try it? I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it. You literally can learn from the hundreds of thousands of people that are in prison that have been founded for doing things outside of those boundaries. And you can look at where it has taken them and how it has affected. And then if you want to go further, find out about their families and how their decision to go outside of those boundaries, how it has affected so many others, and not a good way. And we're here to fulfill our greatest potential. The awesome thing is that I want to say before I close off and sign off here is that those who are behind bars, regardless of where regardless of where your environment is, if there's breath in your body, there is still hope. There is still hope for redemption. And as I stated earlier, where you are, your physical environment has very little to do with the quality of your thoughts. You get to choose how you're going to see yourself. You get to choose how you're going to respond to the environment that you're in. You get to choose what type of impact you're going to have wherever you are. You can choose to impact for the betterment of your circle of influence, your family, or you could choose to do the far opposite. You get to choose. And in your choosing, choose freedom. Freedom to work and fulfill your power packed potential. God bless you. And I look forward to chatting with you all next time. Good night.